Hi guys, welcome to my channel Lush Foliage. I hope you guys are fine and are safe. So guys, today we are going to be talking about a very beautiful and unique plant called as Hemigraphis Alternata. Now guys, this plant is native to Java, Indonesia, so it belongs to a tropical environment. Now guys, whenever we talk about a plant that belongs to a tropical environment, you need to understand that this plant requires a lot of humidity. Now guys, if you are from a place that has very low humidity, then you'll have to use a humidifier, or you'll have to group this plant with other plants to create that artificial humidity. Or else you can even try the pebble tray method as well, but you need to provide it with a lot of humidity. Now in case if you do not have a lot of humidity, or if you belong to a place that has low humidity, then you'll start noticing that the leaves of this plant will start turning brown at the edges, or even the tips will start turning brown. So now talking about the temperature, these plants prefer temperature between 20 degrees Celsius up to 30 degrees Celsius. It can even handle slightly higher temperature of around 34 to 35 degrees Celsius. But in case if the temperatures rises more than this, then you'll have to move it to a much cooler space. Now guys, this plant does not prefer a lot of direct sunlight. A lot of people say that you can put this plant out in direct sunlight and the plant tends to turn purple in color. Now remember guys, when the plant is turning purple in color, it indicates that the plant is getting stressed. Now over here I had put this plant out in the sun to show you guys how it tends to look. You can see the lower leaf is very dark purple in color. That is because the plant is getting stressed. Now guys, if you want the foliage color to look like this, you can definitely put it out in sun after acclimation. But remember, whenever plant gets stressed, it is going to slower its growth. So if you want to get only the color, then you can put it out in the direct sunlight. But if you want it to grow healthy, then you might want to put it in indirect bright light. Now guys, talking about propagation, it's very easy to propagate this plant. All you have to do is just take cutting. You can do a stem cutting. Now I have not grown this plant by seed, so I'm not quite sure, but it's very easy to propagate this plant via stem cuttings. So a couple of weeks back, I had done a stem cutting for this plant and I put the stem in this pot, and now you can see there is new growth. Now guys, talking about the growth rate, this plant tends to grow really fast, and here you can see there are already two new leaves that have started to come. You can see how unique the color of this plant is. It tends to look like it's completely made out of silver. So this is how the unique beauty of this plant is. So it tends to grow quite quick. I would always suggest you go with a stem cutting. You can also do a stem cutting if you want to make the plant bushy. Like if you have the plant in one pot, it at times starts to trail out of the pot, or it tends to hang out of the pot. So you can always go ahead and do stem cuttings and then put the cuttings in another pot. So in that way, the plant that's there in your original pot will start becoming more bushy, and apart from that, you can propagate and have more and more of these plants. And as I said, they tend to grow really fast. So guys, talking about the pot size and the pot material, I would always advise you to go with a plastic material pot, because plastic tends to retain moisture and these guys like a lot of moisture in the soil. Never ever let the soil dry completely, otherwise that is going to cause issue for your plant. Now guys, you can water this plant every day or every alternate day depending upon how much moisture is left in the soil. They need a lot of moisture in the soil. As I said, they belong to the tropical environment. They need a lot of humidity and they need their soil to be moist. Now if you want to know how to make soil for your plants, I already have a DIY soil mix video in the description below. You can check it out. So it needs a well draining, porous and loose soil. So you need to understand that you need to maintain a consistent moisture in the soil, but you do not want to keep the soil soggy wet. If the soil is going to stay wet and soggy, then the plant will get affected with root rot. And apart from that, the leaves will also start turning yellow. Initially, the lower leaves will start turning yellow, and gradually even the upper leaves will start turning yellow. So ensure that your pot has a proper drain hole and the soil is well draining. So talking about fertilizer, this plant is a heavy feeder. Now guys, as you know that I don't add any kind of fertilizers in the soil like solid fertilizers. I only use liquid fertilizer, my compost tea. So because this plant is a heavy feeder, it requires a very rich organic soil. So I tend to fertilize this plant every week. So if you already have nutrients in the soil, like if you have cow dung, vermicompost or something like that, then you can either add liquid fertilizer maybe once a month or maybe once in 2 or 3 weeks, but the soil has to be very organically rich. Now this plant does get flowers. This is a flowering plant. It tends to get flowers between February to May. But guys, this plant is more known for its foliage rather than the flowers. The flowers are small white in color, but throughout the year this plant is grown just because of its beautiful foliage. It tends to have this very silver foliage with a tint of purple. So this plant is majorly grown for its foliage rather than the flowers. So as I said that this plant does not like direct sunlight, so I have placed this plant in indirect bright light. Now this is where a lot of my other foliage plants also tend to stay. A lot of my caladiums stay over here because caladiums, a lot of them do not like direct sunlight. They prefer indirect but very bright light. So this is where I have placed my plant. There is a good amount of humidity because I've clubbed a lot of plants. So there is a good amount of humidity. Apart from that, I tend to water my plant every day, especially this guy. I tend to water him every day, so the humidity is maintained, the moisture is maintained, so it's doing quite well. Another important thing guys, now I have not personally seen this plant in its natural habitat, but there is one important thing what I noticed, and I realized that this plant does not require a lot of direct sunlight. So how did I know that this plant requires indirect bright light? Now guys, when you turn the leaves of this plant, the underneath, that's the under part of the leaves, you'll tend to see that they're darker in color, they're purple in color, they're basically opaque. Now there is another plant as well which have these similar features, and they are calatheas. You might have noticed that the undertones, the underneath of the calathea leaves are also opaque and purple in color. Now guys, why does this happen is because in their natural habitat, these plants tend to grow on the floor level. So by the time when the light tends to fall on them, there is very minimum amount of light that tends to reach up to them. So in order to conduct photosynthesis, every foliage plant requires light in order to conduct the photosynthesis. Now because they do not have a lot of light, very little light tends to reach to them. So in order to make good use of that light, they have these opaque leaves. So whenever the light tends to fall on them, they tend to capture this light. In other plants, whenever the light tends to fall on the leaves, because the leaves are opaque, because the leaves are green underneath as well, they are not opaque, so the light tends to pass through that. But over here, these guys have to make use of as much as light as they can. So whenever that light tends to fall, because the undertone, the under leaf is opaque and purple in color, so the light does not pass through them. So whatever light they tend to receive, it gets captured into the leaves, and that's how they continue with their photosynthesis. So this is one of the reason why most of these plants, or most of the plants that are living in low light conditions, tend to have this kind of a feature wherein the underneath of the leaves are darker in color, so that they can absorb, or they can make use of as much as light as they can, and they do not need to waste the light because light is a luxury for them. So in that way, they absorb the light, they store the light, and they conduct their photosynthesis. So guys, talking about pests and diseases, yes, it also gets affected with a lot of pests. The reason behind is because it tends to like this high humidity kind of an environment. So there can be a lot of mealybugs, spider mites, and aphids that also can attack this plant. Apart from that, if you're going to water every day, and if you do not have a proper drainage, and if the water tends to get collected in the pot, then there can be an issue of root rot. So these are the issues. And if you see any pest or insect, then you can do your regular organic spray, whichever you have been using. Another best thing is a lot of house plants are toxic. So this is one of the plant that is a non-toxic plant. So guys, I hope that this video was helpful to you. If it was, please hit the like button. If you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing to it. Until then, take care, stay safe, and keep planting.